Hey, I'm a former SAS assault team operator, the kind who spent more nights inside cramped rooms than under open skies. What I'm sharing here isn't nostalgia or theory. It's the weapons we carried because they earned their place, not because someone said they were ideal. And that brings me to the HK416, the rifle that settled into my hands like a tool that already understood the job. No flash, no promises, just a solid frame that held steady when the tempo rose, with controls that never wandered and a balance that reminded you it was meant for work, not admiration. Its recoil wasn't gentle, but it was honest, the kind that pushed rather than snapped, letting you stay on target during long drills in cold air or dusty yards. The little irritations were there, the weight on long climbs, the way it reminded you of itself in tight stairwells. But it never distracted you when movement mattered. And out in open transitions, or when you had to settle behind a vehicle and hold a line for longer than you liked, it became almost invisible, doing its job without demanding attention. It forgave grit, rain, and neglect in ways most rifles wouldn't. It only stumbled when the mission shrank into spaces too small for a full rifle to breathe. But it stayed in the team because the people who carried it trusted the quiet way it answered every time you pressed your finger and expected it to speak. When the work shifts from brute reliability to something that needs a bit more finesse, your hands start remembering the feel of the L119A2, even before you pick it up. It doesn't try to anchor itself the way the 416 does. It feels lighter across the spine, quicker to rise, almost impatient in the way it moves through narrow interiors. The first time I carried it on long runs through training blocks, what stood out wasn't power, it was how little it asked of you. The balance sits forward just enough to let the muzzle settle without dragging, and the controls fall exactly where muscle memory expects them, clean and unobtrusive. You point it, it listens. No arguments. But in daily work, you learn its quirks fast. The slimmer handguard warms quicker than you want, and during fast transitions in tight rooms, it can feel almost too eager, drifting a hair past where your eyes stop if you're not present. On long movements, though, across courtyards, along dim hallways, through vehicles, it becomes an extension rather than a tool. It trades brute force for ease, and sometimes that's what keeps tempo steady. Where it really shines is in those mixed environments. The ones where a full rifle feels too heavy and a compact platform feels too soft. It handles close corners without punishing you, yet still holds a steady picture when you step out into an open cut of street or a rooftop line. It falters only when the environment turns harsh. Thick mud, cold rain, or days when you know the rifle will take more abuse than you can track. In those moments, you feel its margins. But it stayed in the teams because the operators who favored it knew its rhythm. Fast, responsive, predictable in movement. It's the choice for those who want a rifle that doesn't fight them, one that trades brute resilience for the kind of control that makes sense in the shifting terrain of urban work. And when the environment shrinks even further, when you're slipping through back entrances, service corridors, or moving under a coat instead of a plate carrier, that's when the SIG MCX starts making more sense than a full-sized rifle ever could. The first time I gripped it, the feeling was almost strange. Too light, too compact, like a stripped-down version of something bigger. But the balance was clean, the controls instinctive, and the folded profile felt built for places where rifles aren't supposed to fit. On the range, it snapped up quicker than I expected, the muzzle settling with a short, sharp rise that demanded attention, but rewarded discipline. Daily work exposed both its charm and its flaws. With a suppressor on, it stayed obedient, but the front end picked up weight just enough to remind you that nothing this small comes without trade-offs. In tight interiors, the handling was everything. Slipping through door frames without catching, cycling smoothly even after long stints where cleaning wasn't a priority, and staying quiet enough that you could communicate without shouting over your own gun. But out in the open, past the last corner or across exposed ground, its limits showed. It wasn't made for distance or sustained pressure. It's a tool for shadows, not fields. Where it truly comes alive is in low visibility movement, vehicle work, or operations where noise and signature matter more than raw reach. It falters when the fight stretches out, or when you need a rifle that can take punishment for days without pause. But it stayed, because certain operators needed exactly what it offered: compact control, quiet strength, and a frame that slips where others scrape. For them, the MCX wasn't a compromise. It was the only thing that fit the kind of work no one writes manuals for. When the job turns from movement to precision inside walls, when every step echoes and every breath feels loud enough to give you away, that's when the old workhorse, the HK MP5, especially the SD variant, reminds you why it never really left the game. The first time you shoulder it, the feeling is almost deceptive. Too smooth, too gentle, like a tool designed for something softer than the reality it serves. The SD's integrated suppressor gives it a muted weight along the nose, not heavy, just steady, and the whole frame settles into the shoulder with a calmness most modern platforms can't imitate. On the range, the recoil feels more like a nudge than a push, the kind that lets you stay on target without wrestling the gun back in line. But live work teaches you where the MP5 shows its age. The slim charging handle takes getting used to. The folding stock on the A3 variant never feels as solid as you'd want during fast transitions. And the length can surprise you when moving through messy interiors full of furniture and unpredictable corners. Still, in those silent rooms where sound discipline matters more than raw power, the MP5 becomes something close to ideal. The SD's tone is a soft thud, almost a breath, letting communication flow without breaking the rhythm. It's stable on stairs, predictable through door frames, and forgiving during long hours of slow, deliberate clearing. But take it outside, past the tight confines, and it loses authority quickly. Open ground, long hallways, or situations where armor becomes a variable, that's where it reminds you it belongs to a different era. Even so, it stayed in certain circles because the kind of operators who choose it know exactly what they're trading. Reach for control, power for silence. They value the smooth, predictable behavior that makes sense only when precision and restraint matter more than raw dominance. And when silence isn't just an advantage but the entire condition of the job. When the space around you collapses into narrow door frames, cramped vehicles, or hallways where full rifles feel like liabilities, that's where the HK-MP7 steps into its own lane. The first time you hold it, the impression is almost unreal. Too small, too light, like a toy that somehow ended up on the rack. But the balance is tight. The grip angles make sense instantly, and the stock, once extended, locks into place with a firmness you don't expect from something this compact. On the range, it behaves more like a well-tuned hybrid than a true subgun. Barely any recoil, fast recovery, and a sight picture that snaps back into line without demanding muscle. In daily movement, though, is where the MP7 shows its true purpose. Worn under a jacket, slung tight against the plate, or kept compact inside a vehicle, it never catches, never drags, never announces itself. Controls on both sides make transitions smooth, and the minimal muzzle rise lets you fire controlled pairs without breaking your stance. But step outside the tight confines, and the charm fades. In open areas, across parking lots, rooftops, or long interior corridors, you feel its limits immediately. Not in reliability, but in authority. It's a tool for inches, not stretches. Where it shines is in low signature work. Escort runs, tight extractions, covert entries where the first sound you make might be your only warning. Suppressed, it becomes almost surgical, letting you keep tempo without telegraphing every shot. It falters only when the fight asks for more reach than the weapon can give. Yet it stayed, because the operators who carried it weren't chasing power. They needed control, concealment, and speed in places where carrying anything bigger was an invitation for trouble. For them, the MP7 wasn't a compromise. It was the exact answer to the kind of problems you encounter only when the walls close in. And sooner or later, no matter how well your primary behaves, you reach the moment where only a sidearm fits the situation. Tight corners, jammed hallways, a rifle caught on a sling, or that instant between reloads when everything narrows to instinct. That's why the Glock 17 and Glock 19 stayed glued to us longer than any doctrine could explain. The first time you grip one, nothing stands out. No weight that reassures you, no precision machining begging for attention. Just a square frame, a clean stroke on the trigger, and a balance that sits neutral in the hand. But that plainness is exactly why it works. On the range, the recoil isn't soft, just predictable. A steady hop that settles fast enough to keep your eyes on the sight without conscious effort. Daily carry shows its virtues and its irritations. The edges are simple but not elegant. The slide can bite if your grip wanders, and the polymer frame can feel almost too light when you've been handling steel all day. Yet it moves out of the holster with a clarity nothing else matches, never catching on belts, straps, or jackets. In cramped interiors, inside vehicles, or during weapon transitions when a rifle becomes dead weight, the Glock feels like the only tool that listens without delay. Out in the open, it loses relevance fast. Sidearms aren't meant for distance, and no amount of practice changes that. But inside the real working envelope, where chaos hits without warning, it's steady, intuitive, and brutally consistent. It stumbles only when shooters expect refinement instead of reliability. It was never built to impress, only to answer. And it stayed for that exact reason. The people who carried it didn't want flash. They wanted a sidearm that would fire after rain, grit, neglect, or the kind of pressure that turns fine tolerances into liabilities. For them, the Glock wasn't a backup. It was the quiet promise that if everything else failed, one tool would still respond the moment your hand tightened around it. And for the operators who came up before polymer frames became the norm, there was a different kind of confidence, heavier, steadier, more deliberate, found in the SIG P226. The first time you lift it, the weight is the message. Not cumbersome, just substantial. The kind that settles into the hand like something built for patience rather than speed. The controls have that old-world firmness, a decocker that demands intention, a slide that travels with a clear, mechanical honesty. On the range, the recoil comes back in a slow, rolling push, easier to track than you'd expect from a steel-framed pistol, and the sight picture drifts rather than jumps. In daily carry, though, you feel both its strengths and its stubbornness. The grip is fuller, the frame prints more under light clothing, and long hours with it on the belt remind you exactly how much metal you're hauling. But the draw is smooth, the presentation steady, and once the first shot breaks, the follow-ups line up with a kind of rhythm that newer pistols don't always match. Where the P226 shines is in controlled environments, deliberate entries, overwatch positions, or moments when you need a sidearm that rewards calm hands rather than frantic movement. It falters when the pace accelerates, when you're running tight corners or working low-visibility details where bulk becomes a liability. Still, it stayed in certain teams because the people who never let it go trusted the depth of its behavior. Predictable, measured, and built with enough forgiveness to weather rough conditions without the finickiness of lighter platforms. It wasn't the choice for speed, but for those who valued that heavy steadiness. The P226 remained a partner they didn't feel the need to abandon. For them, it wasn't nostalgia. It was the quiet comfort of a sidearm that answered in the same way every time, no matter how much the rest of the world moved on. And when the work stretches beyond doorways and corridors, when the fight needs eyes and hands set far from the entry team, that's where the L115A3 starts speaking a different language entirely. The first time you lay behind it, the weight doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like intention. The stock settles into the shoulder with a cold precision, the bolt cycling in a smooth, deliberate arc that tells you this rifle was built for patience, not haste. The balance is front-heavy in a way that steadies your breathing, and the trigger breaks with a quiet finality that leaves no room for uncertainty. On controlled ranges, the rifle feels almost polite, letting you read the wind, the light, the movement of air across the barrel. But in daily overwatch work, you learn its real character. The chassis digs into the ground on long holds. The bolt resists sloppy handling, and the weight tests your discipline during endless hours waiting for a moment that may never come. Still, when that moment arrives, a shift in a window frame, a silhouette on a rooftop, a flicker of movement in a courtyard, the L115A3 becomes something you trust more than your own heartbeat. Its stability in cold conditions, its refusal to drift after long carries, its ability to hold zero through rough transitions, all come together in a way few rifles can claim. But it falters when the mission demands mobility. You don't sprint with it. You don't crawl tight interiors with it, and you don't pretend it can keep up with the tempo of an entry team. It's a rifle meant for anchoring the fight, not moving with it. And that's exactly why it stayed. The operators who used it weren't looking for comfort. They were looking for certainty, for a tool that turned patience into control. For them, the L115A3 wasn't just a rifle. It was the quiet line drawn far behind the team, the one that kept the whole movement from slipping into chaos. And when the team needs more than precision or silence, when what matters is steady pressure that keeps heads down and momentum moving, that's when the M249 SAW, the L110A2 Minimi, comes into the picture. The first time you lift it, the weight feels honest, not punishing, just a reminder that you're carrying something meant to shape space rather than slip through it. The grip is utilitarian, the stock firm against the shoulder, and the whole frame vibrates with a low hum the moment you start running it. On the range, the recoil isn't sharp. It's a rolling, continuous push that settles into your body once you accept that this isn't a rifle you wrestle. It's one you guide. But daily use exposes the reality of carrying a machine gun on missions built around speed. The sling tugs at you during long movements. The barrel reminds you of heat faster than you'd like. And climbing stairs or clearing cluttered interiors feels like moving a metal beam through a world built for smaller tools. Still, when you step into open ground, cover a long alley, or need to hold a corner so the rest of the team can break contact or push forward, the Minimi becomes a stabilizing force. It anchors the fight, giving the team room to breathe, room to reposition, room to stay alive. It falters in tight interiors, where its length becomes a liability, and in situations where concealment matters. Nothing about it is subtle. But the reason it stayed wasn't power alone. It was predictability. The way it ran dirty longer than it should. The way it kept rhythm even when the pace of the fight shifted. The way its presence changed how the enemy thought about movement. The operators who carried it weren't chasing elegance. They were taking responsibility for the part of the mission that needed weight, noise, and control. For them, the Minimi wasn't just a machine gun. It was the steady hand behind the chaos. The tool that let the rest of the team stay light, fast, and focused. And when the job demands force at touching distance, when the only thing between you and the next room is a locked door or a barricade that won't budge, that's where the Benelli M4 Super 90 earns its place. The first time you bring it up, the weight feels compact, centered, like the gun was built around the idea of controlled impact. The stock settles hard into the shoulder, the action cycles with a tight mechanical snap, and the muzzle tracks with a steadiness that makes close work feel more deliberate than explosive. On the range, the recoil comes back in a dense, driving shove, not punishing, but impossible to ignore. And the sight picture returns faster than most expect from a shotgun. In daily rolls, its personality shows through. Slinging it across your chest pulls harder than you'd like. Maneuvering through cluttered interiors requires attention, and loading under pressure demands calm hands. But when you face a locked door that won't give to anything lighter, or a narrow hallway where you need overwhelming authority in the first step, the M4 becomes the tool you reach for without second thought. It's not subtle, it's not graceful, and it wasn't meant to be. It falters anywhere beyond close quarters. Long alleys, wide courtyards, or anything resembling distance turn it into dead weight fast. Yet it stayed because its purpose never pretended to be broad. It's for the breachers, the point men, the operators who take the first impact so the rest of the team can move. For them, the Benelli isn't about elegance or versatility. It's about certainty in the moment where hesitation breaks momentum. It delivers that certainty every time, and that's why it belongs. Not as a primary, not as an everyday tool, but as the weapon you trust when the mission shrinks to the size of a doorway, and everything depends on the first decisive push.